All right, let's just dive right into this incredibly chaotic explainer covering over 1,000 years of Roman history. We are taking a massive journey today, folks. We're literally going all the way from Rome's wild, mythological founding to its eventual, absolutely unmanageable collapse. And let me tell you, it is a wild ride. We're going to speedrun this entire history in 5 distinct phases. We've got the kingdom's chaotic origins, the republic's villain arc, Julius Caesar's power grab, Augustus in the empire, and finally, the fall of Rome. Okay, let's not waste any time.
Section 1. The kingdom's chaotic origins.
Now, before the republic, before the massive empire, there was the Roman kingdom. We're talking around 771 BC, and it starts with this wild mythological mix. The story goes that twin boys, Romulus and Remus, are born to a virgin priestess and, supposedly, the god of war himself, Mars. Thrown into a river and famously raised by a female wolf, these heavily muscled twins eventually discover they have royal blood. They overthrow their evil uncle, which is great, and decide to build their own city. But then disaster strikes. They absolutely cannot agree on which hill to build it on. The argument gets so heated that Romulus angrily just starts building a tiny wall. Remus, being the classic older brother menace, casually hops over it just to mock him. So Romulus, deciding, hey, there are no laws yet, literally murders his brother. Remus's final sarcastic thought might as well have been, what, you're going to found an empire on my corpse? And, well, Romulus did exactly that. It really shows us early on just how ruthless the pursuit of power would become in Roman culture. So Romulus is now king, but his grand city is basically a homeless camp with ambition, right? To actually get people to move there, he declares it an asylum city, meaning anyone on the run from anything was totally welcome. The result was this hilarious reality of runaway slaves, debt dodgers, exiles, and petty criminals. Romulus looked at this chaotic crowd of misfits and thought, perfect. Except there was one massive, glaring problem. They had absolutely 0 women. To solve the severe gender imbalance, early Rome resorted to what was essentially an 8th century BC Tinder kidnapping event. No, really. Romulus invited their neighbors, the Sabians, over for a massive festival. And mid-party, right on Romulus's signal, the Romans just kidnapped the Sabine women. Obviously, the next day, the furious Sabine men attacked. But incredibly, the Sabine women walked right out between the 2 armies, told everyone to stop being stupid, and demanded the 2 kingdoms just merge so their new husbands wouldn't kill their old families. And just like that, they merged.
Moving on to Section 2, the Republic's villain arc.
So, after cycling through a total of 7 kings, the last of whom was incredibly sinister and cruel, by the way, the public finally snapped. They expelled the monarch in 509 BC, swore no more kings ever, and elected 2 consuls to rule at the same time. But the new republic's early days, super rough. You might actually wonder how Rome became so hyper-militaristic later on. Well, early on, the Gauls marched right into Rome, looted it, burned most of it down, and just sat around like it was a summer camping trip. They only left when Rome paid them this massive ransom in gold. It was a completely humiliating defeat, and it effectively triggered an ultra-militaristic villain arc. The Romans basically swore they would never, ever be humiliated again. From that point on, anything not nailed to the ground was about to get conquered.
And that deep-seated fear of vulnerability, it drives some relentless expansion. Eventually, they bump into their biggest rival, Carthage. This was a wealthy superpower down in the south with a massive navy. And this sparks the Punic Wars, which are basically 3 blockbuster sequels of pure chaos. In Part 1, Rome literally steals Carthage's ship designs to build their own navy, and they actually win. In Part 2, the legendary general Hannibal marches 50,000 troops and 37 actual war elephants over the Alps, just wrecking Rome for years, before Rome eventually calls back a victory. And in Part 3, Rome decides Carthage's mere existence is an unacceptable threat. So they completely delete the city from the timeline, enslaving all the survivors. It's a really stark lesson in how the fear of a rival can permanently transform a nation into an aggressively expanding empire.
All right, Section 3, Julius Caesar's power grab. So, with their only real rival gone, Rome gets completely addicted to expansion. They eventually conquer Spain, North Africa, Greece, Turkey, Gaul, taking over roughly 10% of all humanity, and the stage is perfectly set for the Republic's final boss. Julius Caesar marches into Gaul with a small army, absolutely dismantles the region, and even casually invades Britain.
When the Senate, who is now terrified of his power, orders him to return without his army, he just refuses. He marches right on Rome and takes over. He then proceeds to collect political offices like their Pokemon cards. Dictator, consul, Pontifex Maximus. He absorbed literally every single lever of power available.
Now, terrified that Caesar was acting exactly like those kings they had sworn off 500 years prior, the Senate absolutely panicked. In a desperate bid to save the Republic, they murdered Caesar right in the middle of a Senate meeting. 23 stab wounds. But they made a catastrophic miscalculation. They completely misunderstood that the general public actually loved Caesar. I mean, he had fixed the calendar, literally giving us 365 days and the month of July. He lowered taxes, canceled debts, and gave out free grain. The Senate thought they were liberators, right? But the public thought they were murderers. It's a powerful reminder of how totally disconnected political elites can become from everyday people.
Which brings us to Section 4, Augustus and the Empire.
Out of the absolute chaotic power vacuum following Caesar's death, his cunning 18-year-old adopted heir, Octavian, teams up with Mark Antony to avenge Caesar. But, surprise, surprise, they soon turn on each other. Octavian outmaneuvers Antony, who had gotten famously distracted in Egypt with Cleopatra, and takes sole control. He completely overhauls the government, brands himself Augustus, and in 27 BC officially gives birth to the Roman Empire. Now, Augustus was a genius. He understood exactly why the Republic fell. It wasn't a lack of tradition. It was because soldiers were loyal to rogue generals who paid them, rather than to the actual state. So Augustus created a permanent, loyal, professional standing army of about 150,000 soldiers. He standardized their pay, gave them 20-year enlistments, and guaranteed retirement packages funded by the government. This brilliant move essentially eliminated the fuel for those endless civil wars. This stability under Augustus created a massive contrast between life inside and outside the empire, officially launching Rome's famous Golden Age. Inside, you're looking at paved roads, stone buildings, aqueducts, public baths, and an administration that could actually absorb shocks like famine or crime. Outside the borders, in what the Romans labeled as barbarian territory, life was super decentralized and rural. Sure, it was more flexible with lower taxes, but it was entirely unprotected. This structured stability inside the empire is exactly why so many people on the outside didn't just want to fight Rome, they actively wanted to get inside to access its security and wealth.
But, it wasn't all perfect. In 9 AD, Rome suffered a totally devastating trauma. A trusted Germanic ally named Arminius, who was actually trained in Roman warfare, lured Roman general Varus into the dense Teutoburg forest. Arminius knew the Roman legions couldn't use their standard formations in the mud and the trees, so the Germanic fighters ambushed them, slaughtering 20,000 career Roman soldiers. Entire legions were just wiped out. This horrific defeat permanently changed Roman policy. Augustus completely abandoned the idea of conquering Germania, setting the Rhine River as the final frontier. It really reminded the Romans that even the greatest military machine had its absolute limits.
And that brings us to Section 5, the fall of Rome. So after Augustus died, things slowly began to unravel. The elite Praetorian Guard, who were originally created to protect the emperor, suddenly realized that, hey, since we control the weapons closest to the throne, we kind of control the throne itself. So they began playing kingmaker, assassinating emperors, installing puppets. They even auctioned off the title of emperor to the highest bidder at one point. No way, right? This plunged Rome into centuries of military interference and absolute chaos, which really peaked during the 3rd century crisis. We're talking a nightmare era of emperors getting swapped out weekly, massive plagues, and economy-destroying hyperinflation. Money lost its value so rapidly that prices for basic goods just skyrocketed out of control. To survive, the leadership realized the empire was simply too big to manage. So they chopped it into pieces, creating a tetrarchy, or rule of 4. Eventually, Emperor Constantine realized the western half was basically a sinking ship, so he moved the capital east to the wealthy, highly defensible, and newly Christian city of Constantinople, leaving the city of Rome as an increasingly abandoned ghost province. But the fatal blow for the West wasn't some sudden, massive invasion. It was a migration crisis. In the late 4th century, the terrifying Huns swept through Europe, forcing tens of thousands of Goths to flee right to the Roman border, asking for asylum. Rome let them in, but deeply corrupt Roman officials exploited and literally starved these refugees. Pushed to the absolute brink, the Goths revolted. At the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, they absolutely destroyed a Roman army and killed the emperor. This completely shattered the psychological border of the empire.
It proved to everyone watching that Rome could no longer control mass migrations or even defend its own interior. This was the true beginning of the end.
After Adrianopolis, it was basically a domino effect. The Visigoths sacked the city of Rome, followed later by the Vandals. The Western Roman Empire was just bleeding out, rapidly losing its tax base and its soldiers. The end finally came in 476 AD, and it's kind of poetic. The very last Western emperor was ironically named Romulus Augustulus, sharing names with both the founder of the city and the founder of the empire. But he didn't go down in some epic cinematic final battle. Nope, he was simply quietly deposed by a dramatic commander. The Western Empire just faded away.
But before we wrap up this explainer, you really have to ask yourself, did the Roman Empire truly fall in 476 AD? I mean, while the city of Rome and those western provinces collapsed, the eastern half, operating out of Constantinople, which modern historians call the Byzantine Empire, actually survived. They fought on for another 1,000 years, right up until 1453. So did Rome fall, or did it just pack up, move, and change its language? It's a fascinating question, isn't it? And one that proves the legacy of this incredibly chaotic, hyper-militaristic, remarkably structured civilization is a whole lot harder to kill than you might think.